Hello and welcome to Fast Not Good, where we make videos fast and not good. We are now on a different farm in France, so please continue to forgive the audio quality and enjoy each glimpse of scenery equally. This is video 2 of probably 5 about the theme of death in Severance. Last video, we talked about Gemma, grief, and how Severance reinforces Western cultural thanatophobia by not letting characters die. This video is about Petey and the uncertainties around his death. Well, his body is looking pretty dead, but there are still questions. And in a dazzling early season plot development,
Jesus Christ!
Some of these questions are probably going to be applicable for Mark soon. What can we learn from Petey's death? Is Mark going to die? Has Mark died already? Or does the severance chip sustain some part of the person, keeping them, to some extent, alive? Let's recap what happened to Petey in Season 1. Petey was the head of macrodata refinement. Petey wanted to leave Lumon. Petey was a little rascal and broke one of Kier's commandments in making a map of the severed floor. We're told that
Petey is no longer with this company.
So maybe he was allowed to leave, pushing Mark S. to take the role of MDR department chief. Petey underwent a reintegration process, which was confirmed as successful, despite Lumon's assertion that reintegration was impossible. Reintegrated Petey sought outie Mark, encouraging him to reintegrate as well, and hinting at Lumon's dirty little secret. Reintegration made Petey a little bit squishy in the brain, and he died outside a service station. There was a funeral, which his ex-wife and daughter attended. It was definitely Petey's body in the coffin, because Harmony rocked up with a drill to extract Petey's severance chip. Reghabi, who aided Petey's reintegration, said that Petey died because he didn't follow her post-op instructions. Let's say we're pretty sure that Petey, in his material form, is dead. So what the beans does this mean?
That's Petey.
Is Petey somehow, in some form, retained within the severance chip? Dr. Vijay Agarwal, the neuroscience consultant recruited for accurate portrayals of the practical neurosurgery aspects of severance, contextualizes the severance chip alongside current scientific capabilities. The practice of inserting microcatheters into the brain to adjust or correct impulses that control movements or create tremors already exists. Synchron's Stentrode is a great example. Electrical pulses pulse into the middle of the brain, or areas that aren't functioning correctly. Research centres around the world are using these and similar methods to help folks with neurological disorders to get better control over their movements. This is not the same as creating two discrete identities cohabiting in the same brain, as the severance chip does. Current technology is mostly about movement and communication. It's helpful to keep the different technological intentions in mind. Agarwal gave an accessibly surface-level explanation of how the severance chip is implanted into important areas in the brain that control memory. There's basically parts in the middle of each side of the brain that are really associated with memory, particularly on the dominant side, which is the left side for the majority of the population. So even down to the small details about where the chip was placed, you can see on the X-ray in episode 2 where the chip is implanted. You get a rough estimate that it's about in the middle of the brain, and that those are the areas that control your memory. The team was very specific about targeting the areas of the brain that are most likely in about the next 10, 20, 100 years to be implicated in the ability to control memory. Okay, first off, that's a difficult task. To propose a brain region most likely to be implicated in the ability to control memory. Memory isn't singularly spatialized in the brain. There are lots of different regions involved. Elwood and Ford discuss the function of the hippocampus, located deep in the temporal lobes, in memory elements like remembering the workday and also remembering representations of space. When we see Helly's chip implant surgery, the chip might be inserted near the hippocampus. Disclaimer, we're absolutely not neuroscientists. We're figuring this out from cross-referencing diagrams. The hippocampus has been linked to functions involving episodic and spatial memory. So, okay, that makes sense. But the chip severs more than just episodic and spatial memory. The innies go through orientation as blank slates, and alongside their work, they learn an alternate set of semantic memory, such as facts about Lumon and all the lore about Kier. Innies also form alternate emotional memories from interactions with each other, the incentives rewarded, and the punishments given. These different types of memory have different associated brain regions. There is no single memory portion of the brain. To complicate this further, memory isn't an isolated process. The formation of memories is connected to individual perception, attention, language and comprehension, and other processes. There isn't one site in the brain for all this. There's no single memory portion that the chip could fit into. So, given the totality of experiential divide between innies and outies, it seems fair to assume that the chip is able to interface with multiple regions across the brain. The chip chats with and maybe changes a bunch more than just the bit it's in.
It's like having two different lives suddenly stitched together.
How can the insertion of this chip create a whole secondary person, with different memories, different personality, and different motivations in the same brain? Does that secondary person exist in the chip, in the brain, or somewhere else? Masataka Watanabe knows more about this than I do, and he's described a theory of mind uploading. The idea of mind uploading, that is, uploading a person's consciousness to a mechanical platform or data cloud or other unbiologied state, is not new. But if
That's Petey.
then we should consider to what extent Petey's consciousness can be decentralized from biological tissue. Previous approaches to mind uploading needed post-mortem scans in order to digitally reconstruct the specific brain's specific circuitry. The person had to die first. But Watanabe proposes a process that mimics corpus callosotomy, where the neural fibers connecting the two hemispheres of the brain are severed. This process generates two independent streams of consciousness, which are uploaded elsewhere, we'll get there, hemisphere by hemisphere via an implanted chip. Split brain operations have been around since the 1940s. They were originally implemented to help patients with epilepsy symptoms, but later research showed that the separated hemispheres processed information independently, arguably creating two minds inhabiting one brain. Research into split brain people indicates that these two consciousnesses aren't always aligned. Like, one half of the brain might want an office job making technical drawings, at the same time as the other half wants to be an automobile racer. As with innies and outies, these different personalities with different motivations exist in the same person, in the same brain. Watanabe's chip is just severing the brain for upload purposes, though. It's not intending to create two identities. The uploaded hemispheres are reconnected later. So what is the severance chip doing? I've got a theory that it might, to some extent, be relaying some aspect of severed people's consciousnesses elsewhere. A cod liver oil capsule-sized chip isn't big or sophisticated enough to hold a person's entire, complex consciousness. Certainly not in any meaningful way that would, speculatively, allow a consciousness to keep living after death. It might help bounce a signal to something else, though. Watanabe proposes that we'd need a spiking neural network, SNN, that replicates full brain connectivity for mind uploading. If I'm understanding this right, we'd need scanning electron microscopy to create a full reconstruction of the brain being uploaded. Then, the artificial brain would need to be trained until its neural dynamics behave like mammalian brains. This structure is termed a neutral consciousness, theoretically ready to absorb inputs from living brains.
Implausible subtheory!
Maybe Lumon's macrodata refinement is involved in reducing consciousnesses down to a neutral level, stripping brains back to the bare minimum, ready for different minds to be uploaded? Watanabe suggests that by dissecting three neural fibers that connect the cortical hemispheres, the corpus callosum, the anterior commissure, and the posterior commissure, and inserting a CMOS-based semiconductor chip of integrated circuitry, double-sided two-dimensional electrode array, the contents from each hemisphere could be uploaded to the neutral consciousness, one hemisphere at a time. The inserted chip would be coated with biological tissue to help dissected axons regenerate onto it, letting them get a firm attachment to the interface surface. The interface chip stays in, like the severance chip does, to provide a robust interface with the artificial SNN. In Watanabe's model of mind uploading, both streams of consciousness stem seamlessly from the original, and there is no point of death upon severance. I'm not an expert in microsurgical electronics, so I might be utterly misunderstanding the inserted chip that Watanabe proposes. But perhaps the severance chip functions in a comparable way. We know it's capable of more than the spatialized work-life split. Perhaps our pal Sevi is connected to an external neutral consciousness, and it's remotely uploading its inputs to a neutral brain somewhere in Lumon? A room full of neutral brains, one for each severed employee? If so, why? This leads neatly on to question the second. If Petey is still alive in the chip, might it be possible to restore him? If we're assuming that Lumon is using a model similar to Watanabe's, then it would seem that the chip becomes irrelevant as soon as inputs cease, so upon time of death. If the chip has been uploading remotely for the duration of its insertion, and is done uploading upon time of death, then Cobel wouldn't have been so proactive in reclaiming it. Petey's consciousness would have been there already. There's also the pickle about the embodied brain. The brain exists as part of a whole organism. The brain functions because of its relationship with other body parts, and sensory inputs from the environment. So the very notion of uploading a consciousness just from the brain gets a bit sticky and philosophical. The rest of the organism, Petey's physical body, is hopefully in the coffin and buried or cremated. I don't think that particular body is coming back. I haven't found a convincing parallel model known to science for uploading a person's whole consciousness onto an internal chip. Maybe this is where creative license comes in. I guess I'm hesitant on the
That's Petey.
thing, because the function of the severance chip is supposedly in the division between work and not work identities. There's nothing about memory storage, just separation. I'm wondering about and dreading a PT AI, or a comp PT interface, or a PT board, through which characters can communicate with PT's consciousness. I hate it. I hope that
That's Petey.
isn't so literal, and that PT is actually, properly, dead. But we've got the clown meme ready for when I'm wrong on this.
Question the third.
Why aren't severance chips removed in the event of employment termination or retirement? I guess practically it might be harder or more dangerous to pull the chips out than it is to put them in. Inserting the chips, there are risks of snagging blood vessels and causing bleeds, tugging or breaking other brain tissue, causing infections or other chip-related faults. These problems would, I think, be noticeable within a fairly short time frame after implantation. Noland Arbour, I think that's how you pronounce it, the first recipient of a Neuralink chip, reported reduced chip functionality within a month of the chip's insertion. Neuralink didn't explain what happened to cause an undisclosed number of the device's connective threads to retract. Noland didn't get another surgical procedure to reattach the threads. The company instead reworked the software to function with the reduced number of connective threads. Neuralink has said that people with the chips can have the chips removed in the event that they change their mind, or if the hardware updates to a newer version. There's no mention of chip removal in Severance. Reghabi says she can deactivate it, not remove it.
I put that chip in your head, and I'm still the only one who can deactivate it.
Petey's difficulties then start shortly after Reghabi's reintegration operation. We see confusion, nosebleeds, dizziness, and a disarming multi-perspective double self-vision before Petey dies. But the chip's not removed. Once it's in to stay. Practically, removing the chip would be risky as well. Again, snagging blood vessels, tugging other brain tissue, causing infections. I'd speculate that, from a risk management perspective, it's easier and safer for Lumon to leave the chip. Company liability may also be a factor. Newly severed employees are entering a contract under Lumon's care. Maybe severance procedures that go wrong give Lumon meat for the testing floor. Employees ending their time at Lumon, whether through termination or retirement, aren't Lumon's concern anymore. So, whatever, chips stay in. It's easier for everyone not to use up resources for chip removal. Of course, it's probably more insidious than that.
Dirty little secret.
We already know about a whole list of emergency or contingency chip activation protocols. It's likely that Lumon chooses to keep the chips in. It's likely that severed employees aren't ever, really, able to leave Lumon. You know, just in case they need anyone to come back or change their minds about firing people for some reason. It does seem a bit negligent biohazardy. It's not like a screw holding bones together that can stay in indefinitely. It's likely to be more materially complicated than the stentrode. We haven't been told how long severance has been a practice. We know from Bert that it's been at least 7 years, but we don't know for sure. Maybe not enough time has elapsed to study corrosion or erosion or other long-term effects. But presumably there was an extended period of trials and tests. If the Neuralink development process is anything similar to the severance chip, the early implants would have been in animals. Neuralink tested their implantation device on sheep, pigs, and monkeys before Noland. Lots of theories are floating around about the purpose of goats on the severed floor's mammalians nurturable department. I'm not sure how you could test a memory-dividing chip for effectiveness in goat subjects. I haven't met enough corporate goats to know how much market demand there is for severance in the goat community. But goat testing might help troubleshoot areas that are common across mammal brains, like where to put the chip, whether there's immediate biological rejection, infections, motor impairments, stuff like that. I don't know, there are an awful lot of employees in that department looking after not that many goats, and it's not listed as a department that exists, and I can't help but speculate that it's more about the people than the goats. Anyway, the question was about why the severance chip isn't removed after termination or retirement. I think the answer is twofold. First, it's more of a faff to remove it than it is to just leave it. Second, Lumon is Lumon. There are probably ulterior motives and...
Dirty little secret. Question the fourth.
What does the reintegration process involve? Season 2, Episode 3 has shown us the beginning. Slight tangent, I have questions about how Reghabi found Mark.
Jesus Christ.
There's an implication that the chips carry location trackers. This would explain how Grainer found Reghabi so quickly in Season 1. It looked like a day's work at most. Maybe he followed Mark's chip tracker. It would also explain why Melchick knew that Mark was at Rickens. But the question of how Reghabi found Mark opens lines of inquiry about what kit she's got access to, how much Lumon data she extracted, like employees' chip trackers. There's a plausible but unlikely theory about whether Lumon's recruited her back in some way, as the company seems keen on reclaiming employees at the moment, and is presumably keen to wrangle back control over a supposedly impossible procedure. Anyway, Reghabi's all set up in Mark's basement. We have what looks like an EEG machine, and I haven't earned a doctorate in neurosurgery since starting this video, so I'm not totally sure about everything else that's happening here. A KVMA meter, which Google reports is something to do with monitoring x-rays, and a ring of salt or white sand poured over a plate.
Observation first.
The kit looks pretty old and janky. We're in a universe where modern technology does exist. We see it in Heli's operation. Maybe Reghabi boosted a bunch of redundant equipment that wouldn't be missed from Gans College. Also, this old-school setup might be purposeful, as old and janky analog kit wouldn't leave digital traces. Maybe this is part of what Reghabi means by,
I'm better at it now. I can make it work with you.
she's found a way to do it that's more off-radar from Lumon's surveillance. Bit concerned about the possible implication that it hasn't worked yet. How many times has Reghabi tried this procedure?
Observation the second.
We're back in Mark's basement. Why are we in the basement? Is there a thing about being underground? Reghabi's setup at Gans College was definitely down a bunch of stairs. Were we underground there too? Is there a significance to being underground for this?
Observation the third.
Reghabi explains that the equipment is set up to monitor and realign the brainwave frequencies between the innie and the outie.
Waves aren't in sync. Not yet, anyway. That's what we're here to do.
So we learn that both the innie brain and the outie brain are, in some way, active all the time.
Observation the fourth.
Mark's right hand starts trembling. Tremors have been linked to excessive activity in the cerebellum, but can arise from a number of neurological causes. The rapid procedure shutdown when this tremor arose suggests that this byproduct of stimulation was an alarming accident. What was Reghabi prodding? Right hand, left brain, dominant side, regions associated with memory?
Observation the fifth.
The line of questioning takes Mark from the immediate here and now, through contextualizations of his outie's memories, emotional connections evoked by his outie's memories, factual recall memory for both the outside and the severed floor, and negative emotional recall, leading to a convergence point with his innie self. The first memory, waking up on the table. Reghabi stimulates lots of different types of memory, spatialized across multiple areas of the brain. It's interesting to note that the positive emotional memory of loving his mother doesn't get Mark's brainwaves synced. It's the negative, shameful memory that allows innie Mark to break through. Maybe all of the apology conditioning in the break room was a more powerful psychological mechanism than crystal heads and finger traps. The innies are taught shame and remorse, not genuine interpersonal love.
Observation the sixth.
Use of cymatics, visually representing sound and vibration frequencies, is presumably informing Reghabi's process. Very, very analog method. Seems odd, as there are oscilloscopes performing the same function.
Observation the seventh.
Nothing has been mentioned about getting the dang chip out of there. Reghabi said that she put that dang chip in Mark's head, and she's the only one who can deactivate it. Not remove. Deactivate. So, in reintegration, is the brain absorbing memory data from the chip? Is the chip absorbing memory data from the brain? Or does the process dissolve the boundaries between the two? The intrusive and inconsistent flashes between identities that we see in Petey look almost like an erosion of the chip. Like the boundary between selves is corroded and wearing away, like a leaky battery. For Petey, reflecting on his reintegration, this first memory lined up with his 5th birthday. Presumably outie Petey's first memory. The collision of timelines is mega jarring, stretching and smearing any time at Lumon across a whole lifetime of memories. We might get lots of Mark lifetime lore as we follow his reintegration process. So it's looking increasingly like the chip is indeed storing memory, not just separating selves. The chip is going a bit above and beyond the company PR work-life balance line. The chip's a bit of a big deal here.
The star of the show.
And I don't think we're done. Reghabi said Petey failed to follow her post-op instructions. What happened in Mark's basement was maybe a preparation for an additional operation yet to come.
Question the fifth.
Which reintegration instructions did Petey fail to follow? In arbitrarily floral order, because this isn't a ranking system, it's just the order I thought of them, Hydrangea scenario. Reghabi lied. Petey didn't fail to follow instructions. Something procedural went wrong. Rose scenario. Reghabi's instructions were somehow unclear. We don't know for sure how much contact there was between Petey and Reghabi. We don't know how many people Reghabi is working with.
Who's they?
They is a group of people that know Severance is a blight on mankind.
This doesn't disprove my inconsequential hypothesis that Reghabi is non-binary.
Represent!
But okay, this they is also a group. A group could be one more person, it could be 20 more people, it could be 1,000 more people working to reintegrate severed people. We don't know who was responsible for Petey's aftercare, for checking in on his progress. All we've seen is a bunch of missed calls. It doesn't seem like the Resistance has the resources to give reintegrated people enough supportive aftercare. Nasturtium scenario. Petey couldn't or wouldn't follow post-procedure instructions. What would Petey have refused to do? Where was his line? Was it on an individual level? Like, were there aspects of self-retraining that he didn't engage with? Or an interpersonal level? Like, he didn't ask anyone in his immediate personal circle for help? Maybe Petey didn't have anyone or was unable to ask. Maybe Mark's reintegration will necessitate a bunch more support from Devon. Was it a barrier in the outside world or the innie world? Is there a reintegrative process that can only happen on the severed floor, and Petey left before he could complete this part? Following reintegration, what is lost and what remains? Jack and I had a good chat after watching episode 3. Jack got a bit sad and said, "We've just seen a character killed off. Innie Mark has been killed off." Yay, we're back on Death and Dying! Honestly, I need Abigail from Philosophy Tube on this. The severance procedure effectively creates a secondary self. This secondary self is not willfully created. They are the byproduct of a decision made by the outie. I mean, children aren't willfully created either. Kids don't wish to be born. They emerge into existence and figure it out. But unlike kids, innies are utterly tethered to the outies who created them. Innies are subjugated to the outie's needs. If the outie takes a day off work, the innie doesn't exist for a day. If the outie retires and doesn't ever come back, the innie stops existing altogether. We'll be coming back to retirement and death in our next video. So, in an ideal world, reintegration seems to mean a successful re-merging of the innie self with the outie self. By this I mean things like tying up the timeline, so the memories formed by the innie self line up with the outie's severance procedure, not their first chronological memory. Union of disparate selves. This would, presumably, forge a new person. There's no way to restore the whole self to who they were prior to severance. We must be cut to heal. The scars remind us that time has a direction. Time can't be unpassed. Colliding two personalities with completely different lived experiences would yield a new person. In a way, therefore, there are two inevitable deaths per reintegration, the outie and the innie, who must die for the reintegrated individual to live. From who we've met in MDR, innies seem to possess character traits that their outies lack. Innie Mark has more empathy. Innie Dylan has more confidence. Innie Helly has more curiosity. Innie Irving has more naps. It's like the innies are what their outies could be if they were permitted a blank state of selfhood, without the weights and consequences of their formative experiences. But just as a new galaxy will form when Andromeda inevitably collides with the Milky Way, we've got about 4 million years, there's a chance that reintegrated Mark will embody aspects from both the innie and outie Marks we've come to know. The clear duality will be lost. We'll meet who remains when those dual selves are synchronized. Question the 7th. How did Harmony know exactly where to drill, which angle, and how deeply? We're just throwing this one out there. Lumon's been pretty nasty to Cobel in the last couple of episodes, but she clearly does know her stuff. She is smart, she is capable, she is enchantingly nuanced. Adam Scott describes her character as a genius. I'm reminded of a quote in Becker's book. The true genius has an immense problem. He has to earn his value as a person from his work, which means that his work has to carry the burden of justifying him. Cobel is a deliciously mysterious character. We don't know much about her, other than an Egan indoctrination beginning at least in childhood. Her reasons, motivations, and allegiances are, currently, a secret. Only she knows what she's capable of. And one of her capabilities was extracting Petey's chip with the standard hand drill in a couple of minutes at his funeral. Such precision, such dexterity, such ease! Looks like she's done this before. Maybe we'll find out more as the show develops. Anyway, that's that on that. Thanks for watching. More videos when we feel like it. We're still in France. Bye.